It's Monday. It's time to mix it up. If you're not familiar with this one, this is Daniel Smith's Undersea Green. This is one of my favorite colors. I love just like the luminosity that comes through this. Look at how it just looks like there's light coming up through the colors. The yellows that we see here, and it's actually yellow and orange. They're just amazing. This is absolutely one of my favorites. So this is Undersea Green by Daniel Smith, but we're going to talk about what pigments make up this color and how you can mix it yourself. So there's our Daniel Smith color. Now, this is made up of PB29, which is ultramarine, PO48, which is quinacridone burnt orange by Daniel Smith, and it is Quingold Deep if you have it by Core. Nickel Azo Yellow is PY150 if you're working with Core. Now, I don't have it in Daniel Smith. The only version of PY150 that I had handy was my Core. So I'm going to use that one because it's important that we match the pigment if we want to get as close as we can to the actual color. Now, I've been playing with some of these mixes, and I can't wait to show you some of the results. I had some really interesting discoveries, and your wash absolutely is going to matter and play a big role in this, because this was done wet into wet. And I'm going to actually take some of this and put the actual color down, and I'm going to leave it up here so that as we're going along, you can be seeing this drying and changing in real time, because it's pretty amazing. So I have my Daniel Smith palette here, and this is my Undersea Green. It now has a full pan spot in that palette. If you've seen that video, you know this is absolutely one of my favorite colors. So to start with, I'm going to, let me just turn this around. So here's my Undersea Green. I'm going to start with a wet wash. Now, if we want this color to kind of granulate and separate, it needs to be in a wet wash. So I'm going to just put down a swatch of water here. And now we're going to come over into the Undersea Green, which re-wets so easily. So this is the convenience color, right? A convenience color is one that the manufacturer has already mixed the pigments for us. Look at that color just move. Okay, they've already mixed the pigments for us, so we don't have to do it. Look how nice and dark green that is. It is a beautiful dark green. Now, one of the things I'm going to do is I want my pigments to be able to float and move around on my paper. So just taking a clean brush, I'm going to come back through, and I'm just putting a little extra water into this wash. I'm just going to pull that back down. All right, and now I'm going to leave it alone. Now let me just show you over here. You know, what if you're saying, but I don't want that separation. I like this dark green that I see right here, but I don't want it to turn to that. One of the things that you can try, dry paper, right? Got a little bit of my pigment on my brush. And now I'm just going to lay down. There's still a bit of water. I need to do that again. There was too much water in my brush. It's really controlling your water. So again, dry paper, my brush. I touched on my sponge that's off camera. Yeah, see, this is much more wet paint on dry paper. And you see, I still have that really dark green. And get that down there. And I'm going to try not to fiddle with it too much. And we'll just leave that. And you might see that this might separate. There's a little bit of cauliflowering going on because there was too much water in my brush. But here, you see this dark green. It's very similar to the dark mass tone that we have, darker towards the mass tone that we have here. But this is a much wetter wash. Now I'm just going to leave this alone while we're working on our mix. And you can see what it does. Water plays a huge role in this mix, to depend on or determine what you're going to get as your end result. So I'm going to show you this because I have the Daniel Smith Ultramarine, the PB29, and I have the Daniel Smith's Burnt Orange, which is right here, right here. And I'm going to use those two by Daniel Smith, but I'm going to stick with the core PY150 because that's the only version of Pigment Yellow 150 between these two brands that I have. I've got it in core, but I don't have it in Daniel Smith. So I'm going to be using core for that one, but I'm also going to show you core's PB29 and PO48 mixed with the PY150 because I got some different results. So it can vary brand to brand, and that is mostly because of how each brand mills their pigments that can make this different. So what I'm going to do is here I'm going to swatch. On the left, I'm going to do Daniel Smith. On the right, I'm going to do core of each pigment. Of course, PY50 will be just one time because it's only in core. And then I'm going to mix them up and we're going to take a peek at how they look. And I'm going to show you a few versions of this that I've been playing with before I started to hit record. And look already what's happening up here. This side, working with my core, and look at the palette. This is going to be a mix that you're going to have as much fun watching your palette dry as you do watching your paper dry. Okay, to start with, again, I'm going to put Daniel Smith on the left. So just going to grab some ultramarine blue from my Daniel Smith palette. So this is Daniel Smith's ultramarine blue, PB29. All right, and then I'm going to get core. Next up is the PO48, Pigment Orange 48. And this is Quin Burnt Orange and Quin Gold Deep. And I'm going to start with the Daniel Smith, again on the left. So Quin Burnt Orange in Daniel Smith. You can imagine these two together would make like a gorgeous Payne's Gray, I would imagine. Just seeing those two colors right there is what it makes me think of. Okay, and then it is quinacridone Gold Deep if you're using the pigment from core. And you'll see these are very similar in the way that these colors look. And finally, of course, is PY150, which is Nickel Azo Yellow in core. And I'm sure you can find PY150 in other brands. I would have to look it up and see. Does Daniel Smith have PY150? I'll pause this in a second and double check, and then I can let you know if you do have the particular color. If Daniel Smith has it, what that would be called. But that is Nickel Azo Yellow if you are using core. So I did look that up, and if you were working with Daniel Smith, it would also be called, PY150 would also be called Nickel Azo Yellow. So that is both core and Daniel Smith, right? And ultramarine blue, of course, would be both core or Daniel Smith. That's what it's going to be called. So you can see here, our pigments look very similar in both brands as far as how the hue actually looks. With the ultramarine blue, I was hoping I would see, you know, the granulation would show up more so we could see Daniel Smith versus core. I did do a larger swatch on that. And right here, so if you can see those, you can see the granulation. So both Daniel Smith and core have that granulation to their PB29, to their ultramarine blue. This is important. This is what gives us this textured look here, is the granulation of the PB29. And you can see this is already really separated quite a bit from when we first put it down. It looked very green in the beginning, and now there's just this change happening. And I can see the blue, I can see the golds, that PO48, and that yellow, that nickel azo yellow. I think that just kind of brings the light into this mixture. So let's go ahead and we're going to mix this up. I'm going to start with, over here, I'm going to do the Daniel Smith. And again, I had already mixed it here, but I want you to see how I'm mixing that. So I'm going to clean the space off so that you can see how I'm mixing the color, you know, how much ultramarine versus the quinacridone burnt orange, and then the nickel azo yellow. Just going to give a little spritz to my palette there. And there's our, if you guys saw the mix from last week, we did our Rose of Ultramarine. That was a fun one. Okay. So I get a space there, and we're going to mix up the Daniel Smith version. Again, I have to use the core PY150 because I don't have Daniel Smith's Nickel Azo Yellow. Maybe that's one that I may consider adding to my palette. So I've been wanting to add a yellow. I'm going to get my ultramarine blue. Really put down, get a bit of that pigment, right? Because ultramarine blue PB29 is the first pigment listed in the mix. So it's going to have the most of PB29. Next up is going to be the PO48. So right here, and I'm really sad they don't manufacture this pigment anymore. So how long it will be available, or if they will begin manufacturing it again, I don't know. But as of right now, this is a beautiful color that they don't manufacture the pigment. So as long as our paint makers still have PO48, then we'll be able to get this color and colors like our undersea green, but for how long, I'm not sure. I don't know what the future holds for that. All right, and then we have the PY150, which is our nickel azo yellow. Okay, so you see I have less of my nickel azo yellow than I do my PO48, and certainly a lot less than my ultramarine. Let's mix all three of these together. Now, of course, if you want to make a mixture with these three and you want it to be cooler, add more ultramarine. And if you want it to be a little warmer, bring in a little bit more of your PO48. If you want it to be a little bit more yellow-green, then bring in a little bit more of your PY150. Okay, so here's our mix. It's really quite dark, but if you see here, it was really quite dark. So with just this mix in the brush, no water on the paper, I'm going to do just a little swatch right here at the top. This is going to be the Daniel Smith mix. And let's just see. We're a little cooler than the original. Yeah, that's definitely a little cooler than the original. But I wanted you to see that when you put this down wet on dry, they kind of stay put. The color stays together. The color doesn't kind of separate and mix and mingle until we get a wet wash. So the wash is important. I think that this, just by looking at that, I need to add in just a little bit more of my orange. Okay, so I'm just going to bring a little bit more of that in. Normally I would have just mixed it right into the color, but I wanted you to be able to see that I wasn't adding a lot of it. There's still definitely more of the blue than there is the orange. And I'm just going to kind of do this again right here. There we go. And now we are a lot closer. Yeah, now we're a lot closer to the original, right? So here's our Daniel Smith mix, and then here's the original. It's a lot closer as far as how cool or warm that color is. We want to start. I got kind of clean-ish water here. We're going to start with a wet wash. Actually, I wrote Undersea Green, so I think I'm going to do the convenience mixture there. Okay, just because, and I know we've already seen it up here, but just so I can have it on my card, we're going to go, this is the pre-mixed color by Daniel Smith. Okay, so we have our already done by the manufacturer. And I'm bringing more of the water in because, again, if you want that separation and you want to see all that granulation happening, it needs to be a wetter wash. That's the key. So if you don't want that to happen, then you want to come at your painting wet on dry. So dry paper, putting the paint onto dry paper. All right, so there's Daniel Smith's version. Now we're going to take our mixture with two of the Daniel Smith colors. So these two right here, plus the PY150. And let's take a look at our mix. And I'm leaving space here for the core. Just drying my brush off on I keep a sponge off to the side, and I'm often just tapping my brush on that because it pulls all the excess water out, because I don't want to don't want to dilute this mixture anymore. And just mixing those pigments back together really good. All right, and let's go ahead and put that down. Immediately I noticed that this looks warmer than this does, which means I probably could have added even more of the yellow. That's okay. We're just gonna go with it, see how they kind of move and mingle and separate, and what happens. And one of the things I notice with this sometimes too is you will see the color looks very warm at first, but if I look up here, this is looking cooler because it's like my ultramarine blue has risen to the surface, and the golds and yellows have or I say gold, it's orange, it's an orange pigment and a yellow pigment, have kind of settled in underneath, but it's like giving such a glow of light through that blue that I just love this color. I just think it lights itself. All right, let's try one more time. I am going to, again, clear off a little bit of my palette here. I hate to like wipe this color away. It's so beautiful. And I know I would leave this mix on my palette and I would use it a lot. I love this in landscapes. Like, ugh, just wasted all that color. It's okay. It's for science, right? It's for learning. Okay, so again, we're going to take our ultramarine blue, and I'm going to mix up. I'm working on finishing off. I've got a pan of this that's almost done, and then I have a pan that's full. I'm trying to finish up the last of my pan that's almost gone. Okay, so we have plenty of our ultramarine blue. Next, we're going to add our Quin Gold Deep. This is a very strong pigmented color and core. I mean, look at that. This is gorgeous. Okay. So there is my Quin Gold Deep. I still have a lot more ultramarine blue than I do in my quinacridone gold. And then we're going to follow that up with our nickel azo yellow. Okay, and I don't think I need as much of my nickel azo yellow. It is the third pigment that is listed. I think I'm going to grab just a tiny bit more of my ultramarine blue. All right, let's mix these together. All right, we start here. We just get this really muddy mess. Let's bring that. Mix those together. And I'm definitely seeing that this is going to be, looks really cool. If I put this with that swatch, I'm definitely not there yet. So I'm going to grab a little bit more of my gold, maybe a little too much. And I'm going to grab a tiny bit more of that yellow. This is one of those that you can start mixing and quickly end up with a big old puddle of it because you're adding the different pieces to try to get there. All right, I think I like that. Let's give that a try. We're going to, again, put the little bit of the wet on dry. And I'm going to just kind of manipulate this on my palette. Watching this kind of do its thing and separate as we go, it's just as much fun as this. Okay. At least it is to me. Do you guys enjoy the color mixing and playing with pigments? If you do, hit that thumbs up. Give the video a like. Let me know that you enjoy pigments as much as I do. All right, so we're close. We're close from here to here. Let's get our wet wash on the page. There we go. And now, just tapping off, getting the extra water off my brush, on my sponge. Let's grab, you see that when you stir it up, you can just see the colors. They just want to separate. And of course it's core, it just takes off. Core is definitely a fast mover. Okay, and like I did with the other two, I'm just gonna rinse my brush out. I'm rinsing it in my cleanish water, tapping it off on the edge, and I'm just gonna come back, and it's just putting a little extra water into this wash to just let those pigments have that liquid to move around in. So again, if you don't want the granulation and the separation, then you don't want such a wet wash. You don't want such a wet and wet wash. That is what allows this color to just kind of come to life and start doing its own thing. And I think it's beautiful. But let's just take a look again. So here you see, this was the one I did before I started recording. This is Daniel Smith's Undersea Green. And you see here, again, Daniel Smith's Undersea Green. Now the difference is here, I let that water kind of carry beyond the edge, but I didn't bring the color all the way to the edge, where here I brought the color all the way to the edge. So by the water going further than my paint, that quinacridone gold color, that PO48, it really travels, it kind of travels beyond the blue. So it just kind of like the light, it's like the light is escaping off the side. I don't know. That's just what it looks like to me. You guys let me know. Drop me a comment. Tell me what you think. So here is the wet on dry, straight from the convenience mixture. This is our Daniel Smith wet on dry with our convenience mixture. And then here is the core. You see some of that blue still separating. Now there could have been a little bit more water in my brush when I laid this one down. That's possible. Just like here, I had a little bit more water. You see the bloom there. So that is possible. But you don't have as much separation in color when you go wet on dry paper. So if you love the color when it's all mixed together and you want it to hold together, that's something to consider. I'm going to let these continue to, these are just looking gorgeous. These are looking absolutely gorgeous. That's going to be a wow. I'm already seeing some of the change in separation this Daniel Smith, the Daniel Smith Ultramarine, Daniel Smith Quinn Burnt Orange. That one, I'm already seeing the shift go cooler because that ultramarine is kind of popping up on the surface. This one really has, we're going to get a close up. We're going to get really close up on these. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to let you see this continue to be drying in real time. And let me share with you a couple mixes that I did earlier. So this was very, very interesting. And I don't think it's going to happen here, but we're going to keep watching. When I first did my very first mixture of core, where I used my core PB29, my core PO48, and my PY150. And I put those down on the paper. And I did 2 very wet and wet washes right here. Look at how much. And I was just playing with how much I needed to put of each color to get close to this mix. Because, you know, I had to experiment first so that I'd be able to mix it for you guys. Look at how they separated, like that orange and that blue. Doesn't even look like they were green at one point in time. And when I laid that down first, it was completely green. This one, we were getting a little closer. And I had more of the PO48 and the PY150 in it. So those, and they were very wet washes. So it really gave the pigments the ability to kind of unmix themselves, if you would, and just kind of create this, like, wow, look at those. I think they're gorgeous. But that does not look like Undersea Green. Then I used some Daniel Smith and started playing with the ratio of the PO48 to the ultramarine. I kind of always keep my PY150 minimal. Here, there was more of the PY150. Here, there was more of the PO48. If we look at Daniel Smith's version, I think we're getting closer here. That's where I discovered, you know what? I need more ultramarine blue. So I did it again down here. And that was with the extra ultramarine blue. If we look at those, I mean, we're getting there. We're getting really close. It's something that you have to play with. Here's where I was doing wet on dry. So again, that was a Daniel Smith mix, wet on dry. That was a core mix, wet on dry. And then I did one more because these separated so really oddly. And I could see all the individual colors. I wanted to give that a try again because this still looks like it's a green color, but these definitely did not. So I mixed it again. And I got here. Core, I think, still separates. It separated more, whereas I could see, like, look how blue that blue actually looks. It was coming back to the surface like it was blue. Whereas some of these here, I'm almost seeing, like I said, I thought PO48 and PB29 would make a nice, like Payne's gray mixture. And I'm kind of seeing that graying out with those in the surface, but I can still see some blue. Especially when the light catches it at different angles. This mixture is just stunning because when the light hits it at different angles, you see those different colors and the blue comes out or the orange comes out. And to me, the PY150, the yellow, it just adds light underneath, like coming up through the whole mixture. And yeah, I'm going to do a quick mix with the PB29 and the PO48 so I can show you what I was talking about, that they could mix a decent gray. So it'll be a bonus mix for today while we're waiting for these to continue to do their thing. And they are already really doing their thing. I'm just going to slide this up so those can continue to dry. And I'm just going to do it right here. Oh, and did I mention the palette would be just as fun to watch dry Did you lose sight of the palette? Look at that. And that's the core, and that's the Daniel Smith. Now, this is on a metal palette. This is on a porcelain palette. Not having the separation as much over here. So much stronger over here. And it is just gorgeous. Okay, let's see what we can get when we mix up our, I'm not messing with that. I'm gonna let that continue to dry on its own. So I'm just gonna clear off a tiny space right here. And we're gonna mix our ultramarine blue and just the PO48. It's very similar to me to like when I do my burnt sienna and ultramarine. And that was a little bit more of, see, this one is more brown. And I had more of the orange, I think, than I needed. Let's grab some more of the blue. It's one that I think I'm going to have to play with for a minute because I've not mixed this one before. It just looked like it would make. See, now I can play. I can pull a little of each in. But let's see that. This is core, so I'm going to place it on the right. Yeah, you guys can see that. Look at that gray. It's beautiful. I really like that. And I'll do it for you in the Daniel Smith. I'm going to mix it right here in this corner. So again, I'm bringing in my ultramarine and my quinacridone burnt orange. And we'll bring those together. Again, I'm going to have to play with that mixture for a moment. This one's a little bit more blue. Definitely a little bit more blue leaning than what I just mixed with the core. But if I kept going, I would just add a little bit more of the orange and I could get to the same. But this is, I'm seeing it separate here as well. And I would imagine we're going to see some of it separate on this one too, right here. But we'll wait and see. So let me just, there we go. That's closer to the gray I mixed the first time with the core colors. So I'm just going to let that set on top. Let those kind of soak in. But this is like, again, core. I'm getting that real separation. And it's not a good thing or a bad thing. It's a matter of preference, really. So we're going to let those kind of dry. And that is important when you're doing a wet wash or, with anything. You want to let that kind of dry on its own. You put your hairdryer or you put your heat tool to it, you're going to freeze it in place. And you're not going to let it to continue to move on its own and just be watercolor and do what watercolor wants to do. Look at that mix here. That was very gray. And look how much it has separated out. I'm going to slide that up so you guys can see a little bit better. See how much I'm gonna mix them back together. Watch them go back to that really grayed out color. Right? I'm just tapping, getting that pigment back out of my brush onto the palette. Okay. Those are gonna separate back again. They will be orange and blue very soon. And you just actually see the magic happen right in front of your eyes. Look at this one. Look at how that is continuing to change and morph. Sometimes I think your palette is as beautiful as your painting. All right, well, these are continuing to dry. I'm gonna slide that up so we can put that to the top of the screen and you can still see what those do. Let's get a closer look here. So the Undersea Green, the Convenience Mixture by Daniel Smith. And let me just label those. So this is the Daniel Smith Convenience color, the Undersea Green. And it's not even showing up. Like the way that the blue, that I can see the blue, like you can see it at an angle. And I can't seem to get the camera to pick up that blue like I'm seeing it. But look at the way that the granulation is. Even with using Daniel Smith's Ultramarine, I don't get the granulation that I get when I use their Convenience Mix. It is so much more. there's times like I've painted swatches of that, and it almost, when you zoom in, it looks like you're looking at a topographical map. I mean, it is just, it's beautiful. Um, but here with our convenience mix, I mean, I think we got close. We're just not getting the granulation like we do here in our mixture. But let's jump over to core. Again, like I showed you before, you definitely see that blue. Like when I tip that way, that turns almost all blue. You see it on the surface. And as we come back, it brings back a little bit of the, we're seeing a little bit more greenish. But the core seems to, in a very wet wash, unmix itself. So maybe core's not the brand you wanted to use to make this mix, or maybe it is. Maybe you love this, in which case, go for it. I definitely encourage you to grab your paints, grab these pigments in whatever paint you are using, if you, or whatever brand you have them in, and give this one a try because it is fun. And no matter how close you come to the actual original, I think you're going to come up with something that is absolutely stunning. And again, this is one of my favorites. This one came closest when mixing, and this was with Daniel Smith. If we look at those, I mean, there's a little bit more orange, PO48. There should have been a little bit more PO48 in this mix, but the granulation from the ultramarine, it's there. So that was a close one. It's just playing with them. And then see here again with the Daniel Smith, when I did the extra PB 28, or excuse me, PB 29, the ultramarine blue, came very close to this core where we could see a lot more of that blue. But I had to use a lot more PB 29 to get close to that. But these are very similar, and all that granulation is there in both, which is more similar to the original. Here again, our core just likes to wants to kind of completely separate. So that I leave up to you, but you can achieve the exact same result with the Daniel Smith as I did with the core. I just had to add in extra of the PB 29. So if that's a way that you like your mix, it's just extra of PB 29. And here, that was less on the still Daniel Smith, but less on the PB 29 and more with the PY 150 and the PO 48. Here definitely was more PO 48. But you see when I bring in more of the ultramarine blue and then even more of the ultramarine blue, that's where that granulation starts to happen. And in Daniel Smith's mix, PB 29 is the first pigment listed. So they definitely use more ultramarine blue than any of the other two pigments involved in this mix. But what do you think? Did we mix it? Did we come close? I think we came pretty darn close. And I think you can mix something that's pretty similar. This, I could see painting like, sometimes I look at this and I see like river water. And that's another thing. When painting with the Daniel Smith Undersea Green, I've painted that before, where you just put down a nice wet wash for the water, let it kind of dry and do its own thing, and the granulation just gives you like light coming up or coming through the water, and you get shadows and highlights all on its own. It just kind of does it for you. It's one of my favorites. Do you guys use this color? Drop me a comment and let me know. Do you enjoy it? Let's look at those grays that I was telling you about. Here's the core. Look how much it actually separated. Look at how much this PB29 is popping up in places and showing. Of course, this is still damp. This was the Daniel Smith where I had a little bit more of that PB29 in there, and then more of the PO48 in the one in the top. Again, yeah, they're still damp, but I think you can still mix a decent gray with those two colors, just as I suspected you could. So there's a bonus mix if you just use 2 of the 3, but with the 3 pigments that make up Undersea Green, can I just say, again, the orange. As it's drying, it's like the orange, the PO48 is staying within the water, and that ultramarine has just settled and is being left behind. So we see it separate. Look at that. I just wish when I put it down on my paper, it would do that. Wouldn't that be amazing? And just throw a big old wet and wet wash and see what comes of it. That would be fun. But again, definitely these core separate so much. And definitely, I don't know if the metal palette versus, the ceramic palette, because here's the Daniel Smith I mixed on the ceramic palette. I see some separation in the colors here. And even the one I did from earlier, this is like, see, this is completely, it's dry. I'm seeing some separation in those colors, but nothing like I see with the core on the metal palette. Could be metal palette versus ceramic, how they kind of float on the surface and can move. And it could absolutely just be, this is what core does. Again, I don't think one is any better than the other. And I'm curious. Drop me a comment. Let me know, what do you think of this week's mix? Are you enjoying these? I'm loving doing them. I definitely think we can say that I geek out over the pigments and having fun playing with mixing them together. I have a really interesting one I am looking forward to bringing you next week, so be sure to tune in for that. In the meantime, if you haven't seen the previous mixes, I hope you'll check them out. I'm going to pop them up here for you can check out the playlist that I've started with those. And until the next time, my friends, keep creating. I'm going to see you in a video real soon, maybe this one right here. I hope you're enjoying these mixes. Do consider subscribing for more, and don't forget to hit that thumbs up. Appreciate it. Have a great rest of your day. Bye, guys.